"Get out of my operating room. You don't belong here, Ga." "I'm sorry, Dr. Hale. The patient is crashing." "Then let someone competent handle it." She stayed. She saved the patient. And the man who threw her out had no idea who he'd just made an enemy of. 3 hours later, a woman walked through the hospital's glass doors who was about to change everything he thought he owned. Serena Voss had been called a lot of things in 41 years. Quiet, unremarkable, easy to overlook. She had never corrected anyone who thought so. She arrived at Hargrove Memorial's annual gala in a black dress she'd owned for 6 years. No label worth mentioning, sensible heels. A single strand of pearls her mother left her, which looked like something you'd find at a department store if you didn't know what real pearls felt like. She carried a small clutch and wore her hair the way she always wore it, pulled back, neat, nothing asking for attention. The gala was the hospital's biggest fundraising night of the year. Black tie, downtown Chicago, the ballroom of the Meridian Hotel lit up with chandeliers and the kind of energy that only money and open bars produce. Donors in tuxedos, surgeons in borrowed confidence, board members circling the room like they owned the oxygen in it, because most of them did. Serena had been a trauma surgeon at Hargrove for 11 months. She had transferred from a hospital in Houston that no one here had bothered to look up. She drove a 7-year-old Volvo, bought her lunch from the cart on the corner of Michigan and Adams, and wore her lab coat over clothes that said nothing about who she was. She had chosen all of it deliberately. She wanted to know this hospital the way it really was before anyone knew to perform for her. At the entrance, a young coat check attendant fumbled with a stack of ticket stubs, scattering half of them across the floor. Serena crouched down without thinking and helped gather them. The young woman looked mortified. "Don't worry about it," Serena said. "I've dropped worse." She handed back the stubs with a smile. "Your system's fine. They're just slippery." The attendant exhaled. "Thank you. I thought I was going to get fired." "You're not going to get fired for dropping paper." She said it like a fact, not a comfort. The girls stood a little straighter. Inside, Serena moved through the room the way she moved through a crowded ER, efficiently, quietly watching. She knew the names of 2 nurses across the ballroom, both of whom had covered for her on double shifts without being asked. She found them both, thanked them both, and meant it. She knew the name of the parking attendant who'd helped her jump-start her Volvo 3 weeks ago on a December morning so cold the pavement cracked. She found him near the service entrance, pressed a folded bill into his hand, and asked how his daughter's recital had gone. He lit up. She remembered every note. Of course she did, Serena said. None of the people she spoke to knew what she was worth. She preferred it that way. Across the room, Dr. Preston Hale held court. He was the kind of man who had never learned the difference between confidence and cruelty because no one had ever made the lesson hurt enough to stick. 49 years old, chief of cardiovascular surgery, silver at the temples, a handshake that lasted 1 beat too long. He had been at Hargrove for 18 years. He had the plaques to prove it, the parking space, the office with the corner window, and a manner that said very clearly that all of it was deserved and none of it was luck. Serena had watched him for 11 months. She had watched him take credit for a resident's diagnosis in a staff meeting and not blink. She had watched him speak over the 2 female attending physicians in a case review as if they were translating from a language he didn't speak. She had watched him 3 weeks ago tell a black patient on a pre-op intake form that he was probably exaggerating the pain level he'd written down. She had not said anything yet. She was still learning the room. Preston saw her from across the ballroom and said something to the man beside him. Both of them looked over. The man beside him laughed. Serena saw it happen. She turned back to her conversation. The room filled with the usual noise. Speeches about innovation, about healing, about the generosity of donors who would write checks that kept the lights on and the equipment current. Serena stood near the back and listened to all of it and ate exactly 2 of the tiny crab cakes that passed by on silver trays. She was on her 2nd glass of water when Preston found her. He came with 2 men in tow, members of the hospital board, both in their 60s, both with the look of men who had spent decades saying yes to Preston Hale and no to everyone who got in his way. "Dr. Voss," Preston said, and the way he said her name made her title sound like a question. "I hear you've been making yourself comfortable." "I try to," she said. 11 months. He tilted his head. "And you're still driving that same car. What is it?" A Volvo 90-something? 2017, she said. It runs fine. One of the board members, a man named Arthur Keene, who ran a commercial real estate group and had donated the hospital's new wing, smiled in the way men smile when they think someone is being made small for their benefit. Preston tells me you transferred from Houston, Keene said. Some community hospital? St. Catherine's, she said. Level 1 trauma center. Busiest R in the Gulf Coast region. He said it the way you say it when you've already decided something doesn't count. Preston turned to the other board member, a man she knew only as Whitmore, and spoke as if she'd left the circle. I was saying earlier, the problem with some of these transfer hires is that they come in with habits from places that don't have our standard of care. Takes time to recalibrate. I'm standing right here, Serena said pleasantly. I know you are. Preston looked back at her. That's why I'm saying it. He smiled then, the full version. The one he used when he wanted you to know the cruelty was intentional and there was nothing you could do about it. You know what I think? He set his glass down. I think you applied to a lot of places and Hargrove was the one that said yes. I think you are good enough, in the way that some people are good enough, but this hospital runs on excellence, and there's a ceiling on good enough. He paused. You may not be able to see it yet, but it's there. The two board members said nothing. One looked mildly uncomfortable. The other looked entertained. Serena held her glass. She didn't look away from Preston's face. Dr. Hale, she said, would you like to tell me what specifically about my performance has been below standard? I'd like to address it directly. It's not about performance reviews, he said. It's about fit. Some people fit this place. Some people. He glanced at her dress, her pearls, her practical heels. Some people are comfortable being good enough elsewhere. Keene covered a small laugh with his glass. Sarissa looked at him. Mr. Keene, she said, your name is on the cardiac wing that opened 18 months ago. He straightened slightly. It is the Keene Cardiac Center, she said. 42 beds. State-of-the-art imaging. I've used it 3 times this week. She paused. It's a beautiful facility. You should be proud of it. He blinked. He hadn't expected that. Well, thank you. I wanted you to know I noticed, she said, and meant it. Then she turned back to Preston. If you have specific concerns about my work, I'm happy to sit down Monday morning. My door's open. She said it calmly. The way you say something you mean completely, and she walked away before he could perform any more of it. Preston watched her go. She won't last the year, he said, and reached for his drink. He said it loud enough for 3 people nearby to hear. 2 of them were nurses who had worked with Serena for 11 months and would remember exactly where they were standing when he said it. The night moved on the way these nights always do. Dessert, dancing, a live auction for a vacation package in Tuscany that went for $14,000. Serena stayed 2 more hours, spoke to the people she'd come to speak to, and never once checked her phone. Whatever was coming, she was in no hurry. She was at the coat check, thanking the young woman again by name, when Preston crossed the room toward her with purpose. He had the look of a man who had been drinking and thinking, and had decided to combine them into one bad decision. He stopped in front of her and lowered his voice to something that was meant to sound quiet but carried. I reviewed your file today, he said. Actually reviewed it. Not the summary HR sent over. The whole thing. Serena waited. Houston checked out. No malpractice. No complaints. He said it the way you say something that disappoints you. But I also made a few calls to some colleagues, and I want you to understand something. He stepped closer. I have been at this hospital for 18 years. I have relationships with every member of that board, every major donor, the CFO, and the chief of staff. I have built this department, and I decide who stays. He let that land. I decide the schedules. I decide who gets the complicated cases. I decide which names go on the research grants and which names are forgotten. His voice dropped lower. You can be a very competent surgeon at Hargrove Memorial, Dr. Voss, for as long as I allow it, or you can be an inconvenience. Serena looked at him for a moment. Dr. Hale, she said, what would you like me to do right now? He blinked. He'd expected something different. Tears, maybe. Fear, certainly. I'd like you to understand your position, he said. I understand it, she said. Do you understand yours? Something flickered across his face. Not quite doubt, the precursor to it. I'm going to have you reassigned, he said. I'm going to make sure you spend the next 2 years in the most thankless rotation this hospital offers. You will never see the inside of a good OR again. "Is that all?" she asked. He stared at her. "What? I'm asking if that's all you wanted to say," she said. "Because I have my coat now, and I'd like to drive home." He said nothing. For a full 3 seconds, Preston Hale had nothing. Then the glass doors of the ballroom opened. A man walked in. He was in his early 60s, compact, with close-cropped silver hair and the steady, unhurried bearing of someone who had arrived at every room he'd ever entered at exactly the right time. He wore a dark coat over a simple suit. He carried nothing. He needed nothing. His name was Howard Voss. He was the founder and principal shareholder of Voss Health Systems, a network of 41 hospitals across 11 states, including, as of 14 months ago, Hargrove Memorial, which Voss Health had acquired in a quiet transaction that the staff had been told about in a memo they mostly hadn't finished reading. Howard's eyes moved across the ballroom the way a man's eyes move when he is counting, cataloging, remembering. They settled on his daughter standing in her 6-year-old dress with her coat over her arm, and on the man standing too close to her with the body language of someone who had just said something he shouldn't have. Howard's face did not change expression. It was already very still. He walked toward them. Arthur Keene saw him first. Keene had met Howard Voss twice, once at the acquisition signing, once at a board dinner where Howard had said almost nothing, and somehow been the most remembered person in the room. Keene had described him afterward to his wife as the quietest, terrifying person I've ever shaken hands with. Keene's glass stopped halfway to his mouth. "Howard," he said, and his voice came out strange, clipped, the voice of a man who has just understood something very quickly. Nobody said you were. I didn't announce it," Howard said. "I wanted to see the evening as it was." He stopped beside Serena. He didn't touch her shoulder. He just stood beside her, close enough that the geometry of it was unmistakable. She exhaled, very slightly. Preston Hale looked at the older man in the plain coat and saw what he always saw when he looked at men without the right markers. Someone beneath him. Someone who had wandered in from the wrong entrance. His brain filled in the story before his eyes could correct it. "I'm sorry," Preston said, with the patronizing courtesy he reserved for people he'd already dismissed. "This is a private event. Are you a guest or—" "He's with me," Serena said quietly. Preston looked at her. "Your father? Did someone's date get lost on the way in?" He turned to Keene and smiled. Keene didn't smile back. Howard looked at Preston with an expression that was not anger and not contempt, and was somehow worse than either. It was the expression of a man who has just decided something and has no need to announce it. "You were speaking to my daughter," Howard said, "before I came in." Preston blinked. "Your daughter, Dr. Voss," Howard said. "Serena." The name landed in the ballroom the way names land when people suddenly remember where they've heard them before. A few heads turned. Whitmore, the second board member, pulled out his phone. He stared at the screen. He looked up. He looked at Serena, then at Howard, then back at his phone. "Oh my God," Whitmore said softly. He said it the way you say something when you realize you've been watching a slow-motion catastrophe and only just identified what it was. Preston looked at Whitmore. "What?" Whitmore turned the phone around. On it was a photograph, a profile piece in a business publication from 2 years ago. Howard Voss, pictured at a ribbon cutting in Atlanta. Beside him in the photo, in a white coat, holding a pair of ceremonial scissors and smiling at the camera, was Serena. The headline read, "Voss Health Systems opens 14th flagship hospital. Founder's daughter leads new trauma division." Preston looked at the photograph, then at Serena, then at the man in the plain coat. The color left his face the way water leaves a glass when you tip it, fast and all at once. He started. "I heard what you said to her," Howard said. "Most of it from the hallway, some of it from the coat check." He wasn't raising his voice. He never raised his voice. "I heard the word ceiling. I heard the word position. I heard you explain in some detail what you intended to do to her career." Preston's mouth opened. "Sir, there's been I wasn't aware of. This is clearly a significant misunderstanding." "There hasn't been a misunderstanding," Howard said. "I would never, had I known who she was. That's the part," Howard said, "that I want you to think very carefully about." The room had gone quiet. Not the theatrical quiet of a crowd watching a scene, the real kind, where people stop pretending they're not paying attention. "You would never have spoken to her that way," Howard continued, "if you had known she was my daughter, if you had known about Voss Health, if you had known about the acquisition." He paused. "But you did speak to her that way." To a woman you believed had no power. To a woman you believed had no one to call. And I want you to tell me, was any of it less wrong just because you thought no one was watching? Preston said nothing. His lips were pressed together. His hands were at his sides, very still, the way hands are when they have nowhere safe to go. Keene cleared his throat. Howard, on behalf of the board, I want to assure you that nothing Dr. Hale said tonight reflects. Mr. Keene, Howard said, I will speak with you separately. He said it kindly. It was worse for being kind. Serena stood beside her father and watched Preston Hale's face move through its stages. She had watched a lot of people realize something terrible in operating rooms. She recognized the specific stillness that came before the understanding fully arrived. She was not glad. She was not triumphant. She was tired, the way you're tired after carrying something heavy for a long time, and someone finally takes it from you, and you feel the relief and the ache in the same breath. Dr. Hale, she said, I want you to know I didn't ask my father to come tonight. Preston looked at her. I've been doing my job for 11 months, she said. The work has spoken for itself. I didn't need anyone to rescue me. She held his gaze. But you did say what you said. You said it in front of witnesses, and that has consequences that belong to you, not to me. She turned to her father. Can we go? Howard put his hand briefly on her shoulder. Whenever you're ready. They walked toward the doors together, unhurried. The coat check attendant, the same young woman who had dropped the ticket stubs, held open the door. She had been watching from the corner. She met Serena's eyes as she passed and gave the smallest nod, the kind of nod that says, I saw it. I'll remember. Serena nodded back. Behind them, Preston Hale stood in the center of the ballroom in his $2,000 suit, surrounded by 200 people, and understood for the first time in 18 years what it felt like to be the smallest person in the room. The night he thought he'd controlled had already escaped him. It was on 50 phones and climbing. By sunrise, it was everywhere. The videos didn't come with commentary at first. They didn't need any. 12 seconds of Preston Hale explaining a ceiling to a woman who did not look impressed. 30 seconds of a man in a plain coat asking if something was less wrong just because no one was watching. A final clip of a woman walking calmly out of a room that had just rearranged itself around her. The clips were stitched together within hours. The caption wrote itself. Chief of Surgery threatens colleague's career at hospital gala. Doesn't know whose daughter she is. The comments came fast, and they came from everywhere. From nurses who had watched Preston Hale take credit for other people's work for a decade. From residents who had been spoken over in case reviews and told it was mentorship. From patients' families who remembered a doctor who had looked through them like glass and explained something complicated to the man standing next to the woman who'd asked the question. By mid-morning, the hospital's main number had received over 300 calls. By noon, 3 of the hospital's major donors had contacted the board directly. 2 of them wanted answers. One of them, a woman named Constance Darby, who had been giving to Hargrove for 22 years, and whose family had endowed the pediatric oncology unit, sent a single email that read, I want to know by end of business today what action has been taken. I will be making my next gift decision based on that answer. The board called an emergency session at 2 in the afternoon. Preston was not invited. His chair at the long table was visibly empty, and no one moved to fill it, and no one mentioned it, which was its own kind of verdict. Keene ran the meeting. He was not a man who apologized easily, but he was a man who understood what the next 48 hours required. He spoke plainly. The situation is documented, he said. It was documented in real time on approximately 47 devices in front of the hospital's largest annual fundraising audience. There is no version of management that looks good here. There is only fast or slow, and I am recommending fast. The vote was not close. Preston Hale was placed on immediate administrative leave pending a formal review, to be completed within 30 days. His surgical privileges were suspended as of that afternoon. His name was removed from the department letterhead before the close of business. He was informed by phone. He asked to speak to Keene directly. Keene was unavailable. Howard Voss issued a statement through Voss Health Systems Communications Office. It was 4 sentences long and mentioned nothing about his daughter. Voss Health Systems holds all staff, at every level, to the standard that every patient, colleague, and employee deserves to be treated with dignity. We have reviewed the events of last evening and have full confidence in Hargrove Memorial's board to conduct a thorough and fair process. We expect accountability proportionate to the conduct observed. We remain committed to this institution and the community it serves." He said nothing more publicly. He didn't need to. The legal process came next, and it came steadily. Serena had not gone looking for it, but the women who had documented things, the nurses, the 2 attending physicians, the resident who had watched her own case study attributed to Preston in a presentation he'd given 6 months ago, they came to her. One by one, in the days after the gala, they came to her office and sat across from her and said, "I've been waiting for someone to go first." Serena went first. The complaint she filed with the hospital's ethics board was careful and specific, and supported by documentation that had been quietly and meticulously gathered over months by people who had long since stopped believing that informal channels would ever move. A pattern of gender-based workplace discrimination, documented instances of credential misrepresentation, a formal record of the statements made in the ballroom, corroborated by 9 witnesses. The process took 4 months. It was not fast or satisfying in the way television makes these things look. It was exhausting and methodical, and there were days it felt like shouting into a room with no windows, but it moved. Preston Hale did not return to Hargrove Memorial. His privileges were revoked permanently following the ethics board's finding. He resigned before the termination was formalized, which his lawyer had advised. The resignation was accepted without ceremony. The attending physicians whose work he had spoken over were given the case review panels they had requested 2 years earlier and been denied. The resident, who had not been credited on her own research, was named co-author on the published paper. The corrections were small and incremental, and not enough by themselves, but they were written into the record, and records don't forget. The hospital updated its harassment reporting policy. A third-party investigator was brought in to audit the surgical department's credentialing practices. The process was not announced with fanfare. It was simply done, and anyone who had been watching the hospital knew why. Constance Darby renewed her gift. Somewhere in a large apartment on Lakeshore Drive, Preston Hale watched his career take stock of itself and could not find a version of the math that came out in his favor. He had the plaques. He had the parking space, for now. He had 18 years of a name he had spent a decade building in this city, and in one evening he had demonstrated, for 47 cameras and half the medical community of Chicago, what he had been doing with that name. He started a draft of an apology to Serena 3 separate times. He deleted it each time. He was not sure if he was deleting it because he didn't mean it, or because he knew it was too late for it to matter. Both answers were probably true. 6 months later, Serena Voss was appointed Chief of Trauma Surgery at Hargrove Memorial. She accepted the role the way she had accepted everything, without ceremony, without performance, without announcing what it cost her. She sent a handwritten note to every person who had submitted testimony during the ethics investigation. The note said the same thing: "You did a hard thing. The record is different because of you." She still drove the same Volvo. She still bought her lunch from the cart on Michigan and Adams. She still wore her hair pulled back, practical, nothing asking for attention. The coat check attendant, whose name was Maya, had applied to the hospital's pre-med scholarship program 2 months after the gala. The reference letter that came from a Voss Health Systems trustee had been, in the program director's words, unusually specific and warm for someone of that stature to write. Maya got in. She didn't know who had made the call. Serena hadn't told her. The point was not for Maya to feel grateful to Serena. The point was for Maya to become a doctor. Howard Voss said nothing more publicly. He returned to Atlanta and went back to doing what he did, which was building the kind of hospital system that attracted the kind of people who drove 7-year-old Volvos because they spent their energy on other things. He did not gloat. He did not give interviews about the night at the Meridian Hotel. When a reporter once asked him, sideways, whether he had intended the evening to unfold the way it did, he thought about it for a genuine moment. "No," he said, "I just wanted to see the place the way it was." He got in his car and drove away, and that was all he said about it. Here is the thing I keep coming back to. Preston Hale was not the only person in that ballroom who watched Serena Voss get backed into a corner. There were 200 people. Most of them saw it happen. Some of them laughed. Most of them looked away. A few of them recorded it, which is its own kind of bystander, present but not intervening, waiting to see if someone else would go first. The nurses who documented things for months, the resident who had kept copies of her own work, just in case, the attendants and orderlies who noticed everything and had been told for years that they weren't the right kind of people to say something. They were all right there in that hospital. They had been right there for years. Preston's downfall didn't start the night of the gala. It started the first time someone said, "I'm going to keep a record of this," and opened a document and wrote down a date. It started the first time a resident saved an email instead of deleting it. It started with quiet, stubborn, undramatic people who had decided that the truth was worth protecting even when no one was watching. Serena Voss knew her father was coming that night. She had texted him the address, but she had also walked into that ballroom alone, in a 6-year-old dress, and done her job for 11 months without a net. She knew something that Preston Hale never bothered to learn, that power is not what you perform in front of the people who already know who you are. It's how you treat people who have no idea. So here is the question I want to leave you with. If you had been standing in that ballroom, before anyone knew who Howard Voss was, before the phones came out, before the clips went up, would you have said something? Or would you have waited to see which way the room went first? You don't have to answer me, but I think you already know. If this story stayed with you, leave a comment below. I read every one of them. Like it if it moved you. Share it with someone who needs the reminder. And subscribe to Velvet Reckoning, because we are just getting started. The quietest person in the room is almost never the least powerful. And the people who change things are almost never the ones making the most noise. Remember that the next time you're deciding whether to look away,